In June, I read an article by a man named Sohrab Amari. He's Iranian. He became Catholic in 2016, and he wrote a very intelligent article about his anxiety as a new father. And his anxiety wasn't about his son's future education, not about his son's health, nothing like that. His question was, what kind of a man will contemporary Western culture chisel out of my son? Because he's worried his son is going to grow up comfortable but without a moral purpose. And so he gives some examples of what might become. He says, what if my Max, at age 47, is touring Europe with his girlfriend in a luxury electric RV, having cohabitated on and off for nearly a decade, with no intention to marry or have children? And he says that's the optimistic scenario. He says the worst scenario is he's become one of those young men who spend years in their bedrooms playing video games and browsing the web. So that question, what will my son become? What will become of our children? It has to do with the notion of freedom, the philosophical idea of freedom. So Amari, for most of his life, before becoming Catholic, he had the modern sense of freedom. Modern sense of freedom says you do whatever you want. And so part of that means I get to choose my identity, and my identity is fluid. He gives examples. I can be the high school misfit, the college socialist, the neoconservative lawyer, and then I can get a girlfriend, I can cheat on her and dump her because I'm free. And then Amari, he read an article about St. Maximilian Kolbe. And this article showed him a completely different kind of freedom. St. Maximilian was born in Poland in 1894. He joined the Franciscans when he was 16 years old. He went to Rome, came back to Poland, where he started a newspaper, a radio station, and a monastic community. And in 1941, he was arrested by the Nazis and sent to Auschwitz. Some of you might remember the story I told about him, but it's one of the most powerful stories, and it touched Amari's heart. So this is the story. In 1941, when Kolbe's in Auschwitz, a prisoner escapes. And so as punishment for this one prisoner, the commandant of Auschwitz selects 10 prisoners to die of starvation as collective punishment. So they line up all the prisoners. He starts randomly choosing victims. And St. Maximilian was not chosen. But when one man was chosen, he actually said, "My wife, my children." And so St. Maximilian stepped forward and he said, "I would like to take his place because he has a wife and children." And so St. Maximilian Kolbe, with these 9 other people, they were in a bunker, starved to death, but he lasted 14 days. He was the last one to die, and because he didn't die fast enough, the Germans just injected him with acid to finish him off. Now, Amari said, I can't get this story out of my head. Because if we were in that lineup, how many of us would actually volunteer? Like, it's a nice thing to say we would want to. How many of us actually could? Probably not very likely. So Amari said, St. Maximilian had the freedom to volunteer to die. And Amari calls that the perfect form of freedom. Jesus' words today are about freedom. He says, whoever wants to become my follower, let him deny himself and take up his cross and follow me. For whoever wants to save their life will lose it. And whoever loses their life for my sake and for the sake of the gospel will save it. So to become a follower of Jesus, this is really powerful today that Vincent is becoming a Christian. To become a follower of Jesus means you deny yourself for the best. So think about it this way. I told you this years ago. Someone asked a monk, why did you become a monk? Why did you give up your career to become a monk? And he had this great phrase. He said, I gave up a good life for a better one. That's a Christian notion of freedom. You always deny yourself, but for something better. Some of you might also remember the image I gave before of 5 doors. So you imagine you're in a chamber with 5 doors, and let's say you just graduated high school, and you've got all these options in life, and behind each door is a different option in life. So I get to go to college, or I can go traveling, I can spend time with friends, I can get a job, or I can play sports. So the modern notion of freedom says, I want to do all of them. But the problem with, I want to do all of them is that you can't do all of them equally well. So something's going to give. And then the second deeper problem is that most people think, well, I want to try everything. I don't want to miss out on anything. I got to keep all my options open. But they don't realize that the goal of life is not to stay in this chamber and choose all 5 doors. You got to get to the next chamber, and there's another 5 doors with better options before it. And you got to keep on moving through the chambers until you get to the end. And at the end is Jesus. Think about freedom with respect to your attitude. So you know how a lot of people are arguing about COVID? When you argue about COVID with whoever it is in your life, do you have the freedom to remain calm when you're arguing? When you disagree with someone, do you have the freedom to still seek the truth? Let's say you're really tired. Do you have the freedom to stay faithful to exercise? Or are you one of the people who, when you're just so tired, you don't have the freedom to exercise? What about when you go to Costco? Pay attention to people's freedom. Some people are free to be courteous. Some people are not. If you go to a restaurant, pay attention to who has freedom. Some people have freedom to actually interact with other people, but other people are completely absorbed in their phone. St. Maximilian Kolbe, he had 2 doors in front of him. Do I live or do I die? So he had the freedom to choose both. And so he did choose that, the freedom to die, but that's how he lives. So Jesus' words, you have to lay down your life in order to live. Well, what is he talking about? He's talking about finding true life, your soul, your character. When you lay down your life, you become like Jesus. Jesus is God. He made us to become like him. And as soon as you do that, then you found perfection. So Sohrab Ahmari, that's what he's hoping for his son. I wish my son could become like that. So he named his own son Maximilian, so that there would, he said, be a thread between his son and the saint. In 2003, Ahmari was studying at Utah State University's second-year college. And he said one time, to bother his roommates, they were all Mormons, he said they have got this repressive notion of freedom, so he left a pornographic book on the coffee table to bug them. And what happened instead is that one day he goes out for a smoke on the patio, comes in, he finds the Gospels, the Bible, on the couch. He picks it up, he reads St. Matthew's Gospel, and he said, my frame of mind was contemptuous. Here we go with the hocus pocus, blah, 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 Jesus is born, blah, 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 Jesus tells a parable, blah, 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 Jesus does a miracle. Until he got to chapter 26. Chapter 26 is when we get to Jesus' passion. And he said, when I started reading about Jesus' passion, I was transfixed. Because here you have an innocent man who's betrayed by wicked people, and they know he's innocent, and he's the strong one, and they're weak, and he still allows them to prevail. And so Ahmari asked this question, what made Christ total surrender? When he could have vanquished his enemies in an instant, so touching even to an unbeliever. What was it about sacrifice that left such a searing imprint on my mind? Why did I long for sacrifice? I think every human person longs for sacrifice. Why is that? I think it's because that's where our freedom is perfected. So if you think about the most famous stories in our culture, the best ones are usually about sacrifice. The prototypical story of our culture is Jesus dying on the cross. If I were to ask you, tell me about the person you admire the most, you'd probably tell me the story about someone who was just overwhelmed and did what was right. Because there's nothing good about a story. Yeah, I had everything easy and everything just came to me. Wow, great story. There's no sacrifice there. There's no perfection. So the goal of freedom is to become like Jesus. And Jesus is completely free because even when evil overwhelms him, he always chooses what is good and loving. Amari said, okay, he read chapter 26, but it still took him years after that to reconsider his atheism, and even more years to choose to become Catholic. But it began with the question that Jesus asks in the gospel: who do people say that I am? Who is Jesus? Who is he really? This is our last week to invite our loved ones to Alpha. And so I just want to, last time, I'm going to ask you to really consider it. So Alpha is starting next week, September 22nd. We have 4 opportunities, 22nd, 23rd, 24th, and 25th. Lots of chances to invite people. And one of the best things about Alpha is on the second week. The second week, the topic is Who is Jesus? And that 25-minute video, I love that video because it does way better job than I could ever do in just capturing Jesus' uniqueness. Who is he? Why does he touch the human heart in such a profound way? Amari said that his son may one day, he might grow up to live a selfish, meaningless life, and he might actually say, "Dad, I'm happy." And that's a scary thought. But Amari says, but he'll never know what he's missing, deeper level of happiness. He says he'll never know what it's like to read the Bible and to wonder, was that written for me? Or to go to confession and to have our guilt wiped away. He'll never experience that. Or to bind himself to one other soul in marriage. Or to have a nurse bring you your newborn child. He'll never experience any of those joys. So what will become of our children? We hope that they will become like Christ, because freedom, perfect freedom, begins and ends in him.